Well, this doesn't look very cinematic. Cinematic video from a phone. What does that even mean? I think there's a lazy trend on YouTube where we call anything that has a crazy shallow depth of field shot at 24 frames per second, we call that the cinematic look. But really, I think any shot where there was some sort of artistic vision for the video or for the footage, that should be considered cinematic. We can shoot cinematic at higher frame rates for more fluid movement. We can shoot cinematic for a really long depth of field like classic westerns. We shouldn't be pigeonholing cinematic into just one idea of a YouTube aesthetic. But shooting something cinematic from our phones is another challenge because we need to be able to control what the phone is doing. It's been really exciting seeing these new camera sensors pop up on our mobile devices. These things are incredible at soaking up light, and that's a huge advantage in low light and indoor photography. But then we get outdoors and start shooting some video and we want to shoot something cinematic at 24 frames per second, and the footage is gonna look kinda garbage, kinda like what you're seeing now. Why is that? Because our phones can't completely control the amount of light hitting that sensor. What we consider a cinematic look at 24 frames per second usually involves a lot of motion blur, and we can't create that motion blur if we're using a really fast shutter speed. That's our phone's main way to control light, using an incredibly fast shutter. I'm shooting this right now on the Xiaomi 13 Ultra, and it does have a 2-stage aperture. We can reduce some of the light. We can reduce a full stop of light hitting the sensor at any given time, but that's really not enough in bright Southern California daylight. We need to cut even more light. And this is gonna hold true for any number of other phones with slightly bigger or more professional grade image sensors on them. We need something that's gonna reduce the amount of light so we can use a longer shutter speed and get a more fluid looking movement to our video. And the way that we're gonna do that is by using something called a neutral density filter, an ND filter. And it's basically a sunglasses lens for your camera to reduce the amount of light that passes through to the image sensor. These come in different qualities of light reduction. I'm gonna pop this on my Xiaomi now and let's see what this does to the look and the quality of the movement of this footage. Whew, well, I think this looks a little bit better. I had to put an ND16 filter on my Xiaomi 13 Ultra. That's cutting 4 stops of light. For photographers out there, I'm sure you can appreciate just how much light we're really having to cut off of this new larger image sensor on this phone and still maintain the slightly shallower depth of field behind me. As I'm moving around, even though we're using a slower 24 frame per second frame rate, each frame is able to stay open a little bit longer and we get a bit more of that motion blur, which makes our footage look a little more fluid. As a very general rule of thumb, if you're trying to shoot something more cinematic, where we start is a shutter speed that ties directly into the frame rate. Now, you don't want to use this formula for every single shot you shoot, but where we start is a doubling of your frame rate for the denominator of your fraction. We're shooting this at 24 frames per second, so the shutter speed we want is 1 over twice the frame rate, and then we kind of round up. So I'm shooting this at 1/50th of a second for the shutter speed. We call this a 180-degree shutter, back from when film cameras actually had like a circular housing for the shutter. We would describe that in degrees, not in fractions of a second. Now we have these crazy video cameras and we can describe that down to the fraction of a second that we want to use. So if we were going to shoot footage at 30 frames per second, we would want to start looking at footage at 1/60th of a second for your shutter speed to get that kind of motion blur per frame that we're looking for. For a lot of my videos, I shoot editorial style at 60 frames per second, so you can really see like the fluidity of a user interface on a computer or a phone. I start all of my shots at 120th of a second, 1/120. Sort of ignoring the subject of this video, but this is now the footage and the fluidity that we would want to see for this frame rate. We're taking a first step towards using a phone, controlling the light, controlling the look of this footage, and arriving at something that looks a little more cinematic. And the Xiaomi 13 Ultra is a little unique in this regard because it has that photography kit case where you can really use real camera photography filters. It's got a 67mm thread that you can just screw right on there to the back of the phone, but there are other clip-on lens adjusters that you can use on your phones to kind of approximate some of this, and they have little variable ND filters to help you cut light going directly into your image sensor. More popular phones will have more options for their cases and lens mounts, but even less popular phones can sometimes still use those little clip-on adjusters. But basically, 24 frame per second video shot directly from your phone without any control over the light is probably gonna look like garbage. Cinematic is not one aesthetic. Cinematic means you have control over what you want this footage to look like. And thank you for coming to my Tech Talk. If any of these videos have helped you, or if you've got some other tips and tricks that you've used for controlling footage on your phones, please drop some comments down below. And if you've used your phone to try and create like a short film or a narrative or something cinematic, please drop a link in those comments. I'll make sure to go through the comments and approve links on this video. We can have a broader conversation on using phones to replace other computers and other cameras in our workflow, and hopefully we can get a few more eyeballs on your projects out there too. We can sort of share the love. As always, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these videos, and subscribing to the channel. All the support lately has been absolutely fantastic. Those of you who are clicking on links in the description, hitting my home site, SomeGadgetGuy.com, or if you're joining the list of names scrolling by on your screen from my Patreon, that's patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. This list is basically the coolest collection of tech pals in the universe, and they get exclusive access to my ultra-long camera deep dive videos. I have a 58-minute long camera review of the Xiaomi 13 Ultra that we shot this video on today. There's super cool people in these videos, would basically not be possible without their support, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy, all over the place. I'm producing my podcast on Twitch, spending a lot more time these days on the Mastodons and the Flickrs for sharing photos, a little less so on the Twitters and the Facebooks and the Instagrams, but I will catch you all on the next video.